picture of the man you are watching on CNBC Africa this afternoon is, of course, Tito Mboweni. He is making his way into Parliament's precincts, maybe as I speak, to present the 2019 national budget. It's a difficult time to be presenting a budget, and I've heard comments suggesting that perhaps this could be one of the most difficult budgets that post-democratic South Africa has ever had to put together. To see if that assertion is correct, I've got a panel of experts here this afternoon who are joining me in the studio. I'd like to introduce them. Okay, let me start. First of all, we have Tsitsi Hatendi-Matika. She is head retail investment specialist from Absa Wealth and Investment Management. She'll be chatting to us about the markets, whether they are happy, what they're expecting. I expect at the end of the day, she will not be happy. Annabel Bishop, chief economist at Investec. She'll also be taking us through the markets and impacts in the macroeconomic picture. I expect some big figures coming out of here. She's got loads of papers here. She'll be telling us about those. Geoff Blount is an economist and market analyst. He brings in an independent voice. But of course, we must talk about tax because we're all scared what will be in that budget statement today from Tito Mboweni. Mohammed Jada from SAICA's National Tax Committee and who's also a partner at EY, joins us as well. Mohammed, I was going to start with you, then I thought, no, let's paint the national picture. Sure. So can I start with you, Annabel? And what I'm looking for, essentially, are the elements that the minister would have had to consider in putting together this budget. I'm going to come in later where we can talk about the other detail in terms of the big numbers that we are expecting this afternoon, but please, help us understand how difficult this would have been for Tito Mboweni.
So essentially there are just a handful of key elements, looking at expenditure projections, revenue projections, and those of course feed into your fiscal deficit and fiscal debt. And I think, really just balancing items in the budget, expenditure, what areas are prioritized you would need to look at. Obviously Eskom being a big one for us this year.
I was hoping you'd begin with Eskom and say you will not have to provide 100 billion rand, but go on.
No, I think 100 billion rand is probably going to be too rich for this budget. I think you're probably going to see small amounts of money provided to Eskom as and when it's needed, with the ultimate aim of Eskom actually becoming very self-sufficient and actually not requiring this constant drip feed from government. If we do provide a massive injection to Eskom now, it could come very well at the risk of our credit rating.
Sure. So he is preparing this budget in an environment where the economy has not been growing. I mean, people have been downgrading their economic forecast right through the year to below 1%. And again, this year we're beginning around 1.3%, and some people are suggesting that perhaps we might not even see that 1%. Should we be expecting the minister to be looking at the bigger picture in terms of trying to get this economy growing while at the same time is trying to find solutions for short-term problems such as Eskom?
So I think you raise an interesting point because, the key issue is what are the GDP forecasts for National Treasury? Because, the debt and deficits are calculated as a ratio of those. So if they collapse, if we see even weaker economic growth going forwards, as you suggest, these downward revisions, then of course, obviously, it makes it even more likely for us to have a credit rating downgrade because those debt and deficit projections elevate. Yeah. So, that's a key concern. Obviously, having a look at economic growth itself is not the priority of the finance minister to stimulate economic growth in the economy. No. His job is to manage the finances and try and maintain the, on the one hand, not having excessive amount of expenditure, but on the other hand, trying to get the revenues come in to match the expenditure needs and not becoming over-indebted, which obviously is what we have experienced. But of course, obviously putting policies in place and putting the correct policies in place that can both stimulate economic growth, but specifically engender investment into South Africa, whether it's fixed investment or other types. I think those really are the key requirements. And of course, let's not forget, he's in charge of SARS as well. Yeah. And of course, repairing what's happening at SARS. SARS has seen a massive decline in tax take. And, many people forget that that's one of the reasons why our revenues have suffered. It's not just because of the weak economy, it's actually because of inefficiencies and inabilities at SARS themselves to actually get the assessments done, particularly in the large business unit and other key areas like that. A lot of key staff have actually left and, the capacity as well. Yeah,
sounds like a job that no one would take willingly if they were given an opportunity to say no. Mohammed, we are scared that there will be taxes in this budget that will hit maybe not the poor because the ANC is looking to the elections that are coming up in May, but perhaps more the overall economy in terms of what the minister needs to do to try to raise some money. What are your expectations?
Well, it's a very tough budget for him to balance. Yeah. All indications are likely that our expenditure is growing faster than our revenue, which means there's a greater focus on what he does on tax revenue. Annabel was quite right. There was close to about a 40 billion shortfall last year round. We expect around about a similar amount, hopefully less, a shortfall in tax collections this year. But what it means is you've got to be very careful where you spend your money, and you've got to extract as much tax as you can from the productive sectors of the economy. You're quite right, in an election year, it's very difficult to raise taxes. So I expect those who are economically more well off will probably get less tax breaks. I wouldn't be surprised if there's something where we try to tax multinationals more, maybe perhaps in a digital services area. A lot of countries around the world are taxing the likes of Google's and likes of Facebook, etc., on social media streams, and they're trying to get their fair share of consumption in the country as well. So I see perhaps more innovative type of taxes coming through that way. Unlikely that we're going to get a VAT increase, especially given the tripartite alliance.
Good to hear, thank you.
Unfortunately, if you enjoy a tipple or a cigarette or a smoke or a cigar, rather have it this month than next month. I think that's it's going to be much more expensive afterwards.
New taxes?
I don't know. At the moment, the economy is strained. So it's very difficult to stimulate economy and to encourage growth and investment when we are hearing all dark clouds around us. The Zondo Commission, the number of commissions that are running simultaneously, you lose count of them as well. So I think in order to improve investor confidence, and at least hopefully keep the only friendly credit agency that we have on our side, Moody's, still on our side. I think more focus towards controlling expenditure than trying to raise greater taxes, especially in an economy where the economy is not doing as well as we need to.
Absolutely. Tsitsi, can I come to you?
Yes.
I want to know from your perspective, from a market's perspective, what you guys are expecting. There have been suggestions that we could have a capital gains tax increase. There has also been suggestions that we could see some money, a lot of money, going to Eskom. Most of us, of course, will be watching one thing, and only one thing, the rand. If it begins running, we know potentially that the markets are going to be in for a bit of a rollicking period. What are you seeing?
So starting off with markets, I was actually looking at a spreadsheet from last year, just an hour before the budget, and the rand was at 11.74. Compared to now, 14.10 when I came into your studios. So that gives you a good picture. Looking at bonds, for instance, the 186s was trading at 8.10. Now we're trading at around 8.90.
8-10%?
Yes.
8 to 10%?
8.1.
Oh, 8.1%. Yes. Sorry, I was trying to understand your market lingo.
So that also gives you a sense of bonds have also, gone up, and that makes it more difficult for the country as a whole to finance our debt, right? And then looking at your stock markets, the all share was trading closer to 58,000. And we've gone down by about 2,000 points, now closer to 56.
55, 75, 4 is what I'm looking at here.
But
again,
it's still
of
2,000,
today.
right? Down.
Yeah, true.
So no matter what metric you're looking at, markets have deteriorated. We've seen less of a jubilance. We've seen people becoming quite depressed about where to put their money and what to do. In terms of, I think you were asking me about what we're expecting.
Yes.
Very difficult. As the other panelists have said, there's not much room, and there's not much they can do about revenue. If you calculate all the possible revenue or taxes that they could implement, it's only about 7 billion that they could raise from your sin taxes, your whatever else, little things that they can do. Fuel levy is the one that I think hasn't been mentioned by the other panelists, and that one is also contentious, right?
Because you reckon you'll increase? You'll add some more?
Very likely.
Take some more, let me put it that way.
He could, but is that the best way? There's no room, right? So already your fuel taxes are closer to 6 rand, and people have been complaining. Last year it went up by 52 cents, and we're already anticipating an under recovery on the fuel price for this month. So already you're expecting 50 cents.
Your oil prices
exactly. Your rand is much weaker, oil price has gone up, so you're expecting 50 cents without a tax added on. The consumer is not going to stomach that. So it makes it very, very hard. The only space, as said before, is expenditure. And
let's see if he's, I was going to use an expression that's not appropriate. Let's leave it there for now. If I can come to you, Geoff, because we have had the institutions, the big houses. I think they have some kind of influence when they speak, right? Because I'm sure the minister does listen. From your perspective, David, as an independent, you look at this budget, you look at the upcoming elections, and you look at the challenges that the minister faces. We've spoken about ESCOM, we haven't talked about SAA, and we haven't talked about the other parastatals that the minister has to look at. What are you expecting? Look,
I think that we all know the bad news that is out there. So we know about ESCOM, we know about the state of SARS, we know about the fact that the economy is struggling, so it can't, if you're trying to stimulate growth, add more tax burden into the economy, because that's going to act as a deterrent. We also know the problems with expenditure, you know, the priorities ranging from ESCOM, SAA, so the SAE priorities, through to then the social priorities from a social spend perspective to a GDFI spend perspective. And so the problem is that this is, at the risk of using a typical economic term, a balancing act between all of these factors. I actually think this is almost a no-win budget. The problem is that there's very little, I think, that the minister can actually do in terms of trying to create really innovative solutions or trying to be really bold or aggressive. And why I say that and why there's little he can do is it's an election year.
Sure.
And so if you want to...
If it was an election year, what are you suggesting?
Well, if it wasn't an election year, I think that you could probably get some more bold policy out of government, and you could get more bold policy direction. So right now, you know, in an election year, the issue of, let's call it economic pragmatism versus ideology is playing out. You've got the tripartite alliance that's busy already concerned. COSATU's, you know, a bit unhappy with the ESCOM plans. You've got the social requirements of the country. You've got pressure from the left, from the EFF, driving potential policy. And so I think that they're going to rather stay a rather safe, neutral course, which I suspect is more of the same, but try and steady markets. And try and just say, look, we've got a handle on this. Give us time. We're going to sort it out. We're not going to get, I think, the bold moves that are potentially needed to try and shake the tree a bit, which may upset both the left and the right, the ideology versus the economic pragmatism.
So almost like a holding statement, if you like, until next year when you can really go after the fat that's within government. I wanted to ask you a question, and this also applies to Annabel as well as, let's bring in everybody here. When you look at South Africa's finances, I remember a couple of years ago, I covered the Zambian budget, and the finance minister then, Mr. Mutati, I think, Felix Mutati, spoke about trying to make sure that Zambia was fiscally fit. And when you look at South Africa's finances, is that a phrase you can use? Or there's a lot of fat here that the minister could work with that could potentially help him balance those numbers?
The term fiscally fit is quite interesting. I think, again, if this was not an election year, you could... this is really going to be, this is ultimately about expenditure. I don't think you can tweak the taxes here and there, but this is actually about either being more efficient in tax collection and or how you prioritize and what you're doing expending and how you spend that. And a massive part of that is, if you want to call it the fat that sits within government, both within the bureaucracy, both within the inefficiencies of state, both with the cost of corruption that's come to the country. And I think that if you wanted to get fiscally fit, that means that, or you wanted to balance the budget or get more bang for your spend, you're going to have to attack that fat. And that fat comes with big political cost. And as I said, I think this year we're not fiscally fit. And I think perhaps after the elections, especially if the Ramaphosa administration gets the confidence to continue and actually maybe embark on becoming fiscally fit, we could see some changes. Hence our view, it's a holding pattern.
I heard your doubt. You said if the Ramaphosa administration gets the vote of confidence from the electorate. Do you want to come in? Is there fiscal space for the minister here?
Look, I think certainly in our expected case, we do see Cyril Ramaphosa remaining head of the ANC. And,
that's your call. We are recording, Annabel.
Seeing a majority in the elections, but obviously the other scenarios as well. But I think having a look at government finances, I'd say they're exceptionally constrained on the revenue side. I think the debt levels are extremely high. They've actually pretty much reached the limit that rating agencies are happy with from a projection perspective in terms of...
But Annabel, when you compare South Africa with other emerging markets, that's what I was going to say. I mean, we're around 60%, so what? Come on, others are 110%. Japan is worse.
So you need to actually, first of all, graduate into emerging and advanced economies, because obviously there's a difference in terms of the ratings. But more importantly, you need to look at which emerging market economies are not investment grade and which obviously are investment grade. So that's obviously quite a key point. And for us, obviously if we touch 55 or 60 and we come back, that's not the end of the world. But if we, go to 55 or 60 and then we continue to exceed that, that is what the credit rating agencies, so this is not our views, but what the credit rating agencies deem as being in a situation where you could fall into a debt trap, a downward spiral, where you could actually be unable, incapable ultimately to repay your debt, plus your debt then keeps on escalating, and of course you then are borrowing to actually repay the interest, which is not a healthy situation to be in. That's essentially a debt trap. And in that type of environment, the credit rating agencies can't rate you in terms of an investment grade country. You'll have to slip into investment grade. The risk is that you then keep on slipping lower, and we've seen that with Fitch and S&Ps, where they continue, even in sub-investment grade, to rate us lower and lower. So we need to get our government finance order. We need to become fiscally fit.
How fiscally fit are we?
So I would say that in terms of the fiscal deficit, the norm is really around 3%, and we probably will see 4.1% today for the current fiscal year. And then moving out into the 3-year medium-term expenditure framework period, that's probably going to be around 4% as well. It's less of a worry than the debt. The debt obviously being at that close to that 60% mark projected out there by Tito Mboweni in the medium-term budget policy statement. This is the big issue for us, particularly if we down the line start trying to absorb some of Eskom's debt and adding to it.
Tsitsi, you want to come in?
Mohammed, sorry, just to put some numbers on the table. Last year we budgeted for about 180 billion on expenditure on interest. As of end of January, we're already at 192 billion.
Sure.
All right, so
we're over budget.
We're over budget. There was a reserve, a contingency reserve, about around about 8 billion. That's already wiped out. And if you look at all of the state-owned entities that need more support, more funding, we talked about Eskom. Let's not forget about SAA. Let's not forget about what's going on with Denel as well. We are not fiscally fit. I think let's be very clear. I think last year's budget was very optimistic. I think this year's budget has to be very realistic. I think that's what we need to really look for. And I think we as the nation are expecting that. It's not just the rating agencies. They can downgrade us. We'll be, I think we just one above junk level at the moment. But it's Moody's as well. But hopefully they'll still be on our side. But it's about every single person, the man in the street. What are they feeling? Is the tax burden too much for them? Now, you said we can go to 60%. Are you spending 60% of what you're earning on debt? I think that's a very dangerous area for us to get into, and we need to be more educated, and we need to really help our country to lower our levels of debt, especially personal consumption debt, which I think is increasing much more.
What's your sense, though, in terms of what the minister can do within the confines of the numbers that he's dealing with and the economy that he's operating in?
That's why it's so difficult for him right now. You've got an election year, plus you have reality on the ground where you have health that needs to be spent. So one of the things they could do is, take the pain now, cut the medical aid tax credit, which gives him another 20 billion rand extra revenue. You and I will.
Did you say
that? No, but and use that to fund NHI. Implementing NHI, National Health Fund, it's going to be very difficult. It's a long-term view, but you also have education. We had free education be promised just before the budget last year. And if you heard Naledi Pandor, who's the Minister of Higher Education, recently saying that it's also not just education, but it's also the accommodation for students that needs to be implemented. So there's a need to spend. Our social grants are around about close to about 200 billion. Right. So our interest, we pay interest of 190 close to, which is increasing. We pay 200 odd billion.
In the budget, the fastest increase in item.
Correct.
In the last few years.
And we can't stop spending on social grants. If you've ever driven in the rural areas and you ever went there on Saturday, not Grant Day, Saturday, that entire economy depends on that grant. So it's a very difficult budget to
Which brings me to the other side of it. Do you then potentially see a wealth tax?
Very much. It may come through. I think from a populace, you could have, for example, people whose assets, for example, and we're tinkering on edges here now. Thomas Piketty was here a couple of years ago where he came and gave a speech and talked about wealth taxes. It was well received in some quarters, more on the left, not so much on the right. But you wouldn't be out of the norm in terms of what's happening globally, where you're looking at a tax rate of 75% on the most highest earning.
That's what that congresswoman in the States is suggesting.
Correct.
Right?
So that's on where you have a states where values of more than $10, $20 million type of thing. Whether we have
extreme high net worth.
Extreme high, correct. The difficulty here is the message you're sending is wrong. Those are the people that we need to attract to come and invest here.
Sure.
And we need them to come and invest because that sends a positive environment to, yes, South Africa is open for business.
They're also the ones who create jobs. You know, those tend to be your large CEOs of corporates that tend, if you want to attract foreign direct investment, which is actually job creating investment, not your portfolio flow investment, then from that perspective,
she needs to come in as well.
She must come in. It's very important, her area. But if you want to create, you know, FDI, that's only 1% of GDP. Sure. It's minuscule, you know, it's less than 1%. And that's a massive job creating environment, you know, for reducing our very high unemployment rate in South Africa, known as bricks and mortar investment. You know, of creating a lot more companies so that we can employ a lot more people so that they can contribute financially. Obviously, you know, the portfolio flows are very important, equities to raise the capital, but we actually need the companies on the ground. I
at the danger of actually diverting and losing focus of where I wanted you to come in, I want you to think about the investment drive by the president and the search for the R1 trillion that over the next 5 years that he has started, and also the amounts of money that we've seen being pledged and what difference that would make, because that in part answers your question about FDI, right? But let's talk portfolio, which she is saying, yeah, it's important, but not quite important. If we do get...
It is important, it just has a different importance.
It's a different importance because
they're all important. They're all important.
Right? Anyway, come in.
Okay, so I think I was making mental notes as we're going along. So starting at the risk of cutting into the bone, which is where we could land up, you know. We're not fit. And if you think about the metrics, if you think of the current parameters that we're working in, the difficulty here is social grants. 17.5 million people on social grants, that's a large number of the population, right? Yeah. And if you then go to wealth taxes, the wealthy people are the mobile people. So they actually have the mobility to wake up and say, this is not working. Sure. You know, at some point there's a tax rate where these people feel like this is too much and they can actually up and leave. And that makes it more difficult for the economy. And those are the people who create jobs. Those are the people you actually want to attract. So that makes it very difficult. Portfolio flows are extremely important, but FDI is much more important. So portfolio flows, unfortunately, are in and out, and you can't actually build an economy on that. Sure. So if you use the bond markets, for example, yesterday we had the Tuesday auction, which they have every week. Yeah. Foreigners were a much bigger percentage of it than they were last week. So
buying or selling?
They were buying. So they bought, I think it was 22% of the whole total auction was offshore investors. Last week it was 14%. Sure. So, you know, these people are very unpredictable. And when you speak to offshore investors, they talk about it's a relative game. They're looking at, you know, Turkey versus South Africa or Brazil versus South Africa. So it just depends on what's going on, how it looks, the allocation, the WIGB, which will be quite important if we get out of the index that actually that we're in because of the Moody's rating. We're still there.
Which is the next question that I want to pose, because I wanted to know from you guys your expectations in terms of what Moody's is going to say after this budget has been presented. I have seen a few suggestions that we may well be really into junk after this budget because Moody's is going to downgrade us. What are you expecting?
So the very last thing, I think the minister could do it in such a way that if you can't make the hard decisions for this year, at least in the next year and the next year, the 3-year projection, that we actually see it happening. Annabel was talking about that if we go to the 60% and we come back, that's acceptable. It's not great, but that's acceptable. So if you can see that after the post-elections, they actually will be making the hard decisions, and these will be done swiftly, that makes a difference.
It doesn't sound like it, because you are saying post this budget, we're still going to see that deficit around 4% for the next 3 years. Correct.
That is the forecast in the papers at the moment.
Exactly. So this is where the difficulty lies. He really has to pull a rabbit out of a hat and do something to show that the metrics really improve going into that 3-year forecasting period, or else Moody's will have to downgrade.
Absolutely.
If I might add, I mean,
please come in.
Look, I mean, I think that in terms of the metrics, the rating agents, we know what they look at. They publish their factors. we actually should be in junk status. Okay, I mean, Moody's has given us the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
And what the rating agencies do have is a soft factor capability, where soft factor, where they can look at policy, or they can almost do an override. No, it's not an override, but they can take into account soft factors that come into scoring the economy.
Right.
And right now we've got the benefit of the doubt, and we've actually, every year we know that we should be downgraded, and then we kind of just scrape it because of the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
And I think it's very hard to say. Maybe he does do something in the budget. He inspires a bit of confidence. They use that soft factor not to downgrade. I think it's very tough. I think that they'll downgrade, and it's not because it's a bad budget. I just think we've kind of exhausted our goodwill, and we need to just and we need to work from here to fix that.
Sure.
Look, I think certainly we're going to see a downgrade to our outlook. That's what I anticipate. So after the budget, they could look either at downgrading our rating or the actual outlook attached. And the outlook's either positive, negative, or neutral. And actually it was negative when we were in the budget last year this time. Right. And on the Praveen Gordhan budget, we saw ourselves upgraded from an outlook perspective to neutral. We anticipate this year that we're going to see ourselves drop to a negative outlook, and that could happen in March when Moody's rates us. And of course, from a country perspective, and from that view, it really then gives us 18 months to get our house in order. And if we don't get our house in order, then we could see a downgrade. They could do it before 18 months, and they could, of course, take us straight to a negative, to a sub-investment grade. But we believe first they'll take us this negative outlook. And I think, this is really where we're sitting at the moment. Very much beholden on what the credit rating agency says. Sure. But the credit default swaps in the financial markets actually show us that we are already being rated as a sub-investment grade country.
Let's take a break. Again in the studio, I have with me Tsitsi Hatendi-Matika. She's head retail investment specialist at Absa Wealth and Investment Management. Annabel Bishop is chief economist at Investec. Geoff Blount is an independent economist and analyst, and Mohammed Jada is from SAICA's National Tax Committee and partner at EY. So you listened to that. Let's call him a small business. He does run a small business, and he is talking about getting some kind of support from the government. I don't know. Does anyone expect Tito to come up with incentives to try to get business growing in this country, or is just going to be so consumed by trying to balance the numbers he forgets about trying to get the goose laying some more eggs?
I think he has to try. So
he has to?
He has to try. So small businesses and trying to address those issues, it doesn't have to be large measures, but it has to be something, So give them something.
But he's not going to cut the corporate tax rate, right?
No. We don't think, we definitely don't. It's not our central case that he will touch that. Okay. But definitely some measures to help out small businesses, maybe linking it with the youth fund that they created, maybe try and link the different things to make the economy look like we're moving forward. Yeah. But as you said, small things.
Small things.
Yeah, there are general small allocations every year, and I think he'll just continue doing those. And of course, they have said recently they're going to extend that tax relief for employing youth in companies. And I think
10 years,
yes. So I think there's many small areas where he can provide relief. Also, the DTI also looks at measures as well to assist. But I think essentially, obviously they're very constrained financially as well, and it's difficult when you have allowed yourself to get into such a mess in terms of Eskom and government finances that I don't have enough money to actually stimulate the economy. 100%. And necessarily, if you substantially increase taxes, for example, that can actually see lower tax revenue come in as a rand amount because our tax buoyancy ratio has actually fallen now. It's gone into a negative environment. Look, essentially, it just basically means that if you increase the tax rates. Are you going to collect more tax, or are you going to collect less tax?
As the GDP grows,
as your economy goes. And people think, you just have to keep on increasing tax rates forever and you're going to get a lot more tax. But actually, if you increase tax rates too much, your economy slows down. And we have increased tax rates a lot over the past 10 years, and our economy has slowed down. Right. We've seen economic growth probably coming out last year of around 0.5%. And in 2008, economic growth was above 5%. So we've lost a decimal place. We've gone from 5.5% to 0.5% in a space of 10 years.
Businesses down, or people perhaps are are now devising ways in which to pay less tax.
So that's a separate issue. But just returning to the economy, okay, if you, the more you increase tax, it's negative for economic growth. The higher your taxes are, the slower your economy is basically going to be in terms of economic growth. If it's been a persistent situation over 10 years. If you're cutting taxes, that stimulates economic growth and it actually enables fast economic growth. So return to the tax buoyancy ratio. Basically what you're saying is you get to a certain point where you can't actually increase taxes much more because you're actually going to reduce the amount of money you collect, not increase it.
Sure. Can I come in?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe to add on to the conversation that the businessman was talking about, talking about corruption and the impact on that. I think that corruption is one of those massive soft costs in the economy. And I know that obviously we spoke about some of the of all the various commissions that are on at the moment, and we all understand the cost of corruption. But the truth is, I think that part of the mess that we're in is because we've had a very inefficient state, because the ability for state to procure has become clouded by corruption. In other words, the state is overpaying for services that it's been buying. And when you overpay for services that you're buying, it means there's less money for everything else. So the efficiency, so one of the soft factors that you can address in this is actually talking about the efficiency of state, both within SOEs, and we can see this. You know, you can manage an SOE into the ground, or you can raise its expenditure to such an extent that you actually you bankrupt the SOE because it's actually procuring assets at much higher prices.
But just how bad are those systems?
Well, no, I think that, look, so I understand government is well aware of these, and I think government understands the issues of trying to actually bring and control these and create efficiency. But unfortunately, you're dealing with as an administration now that inherited a mess from a previous administration. And I think it's actually, so the soft factors that you want to see, and everyone says government is starting to talk tough on corruption, but you also want to see some activity and action. You want to see consequence, so people do think twice about loading the tender.
And you want to see people going to jail?
Potentially, and
it's about getting the money back.
And it's getting the money. It's getting the money back. And also reducing, affecting the culture of corruption. And I think if you get those efficiencies up, you'll start getting more bang for the buck. At the same time, it means you can deliver more for the same.
Absolutely. Mohammed?
I think what Tito needs to do is, or Minister Tito, he's got to encourage hope. And South Africans, we're ever hopeful. We've been through tough times before. We've come through it. And always there's something that gets us over the hill, some way or the other. And I think it starts from the ground level. So for example, making sure municipalities work, making sure services are delivered, making sure that there are roads where where there aren't any, making sure the street lights stay on, because many lights are not on, making sure the potholes are fixed up. And the businessman that was interviewed, one thing he didn't mention was, what's the cost to his business in terms of getting backup generator power when Eskom keeps on blowing up? So those are the things that just getting the basics right, I think will really instill confidence. And I think if Tito is politically, there's no ambition for him to go and be a populist. He has got the ability right now, as the Minister of Finance, to do things that are realistic. And that's what we need to look for.
Okay. So my next question is, whose budget is this likely to be? Is the minister likely to go for the low-hanging fruit and look at the electorate and look at the fortunes of the ANC and try and put in things there that makes voters happy? Or is he likely to be looking at the rating agencies and thinking, if Moody's goes, I am in trouble? Or is he likely to be thinking, let's get in part of that $100 billion that the president is looking for locked in so that we set this economy on a sound footing going forward? I'll start from you and come inside.
Look, I think the investment summit that President Ramaphosa held earlier in the year was the start of good things. They had lots of pledges, lots of promises. You know, it's not easy to get the likes of Jack Ma, who's very influential around the world, to come and give a positive outlook to the country. We have the ability to leapfrog in terms of our development with the fourth industrial revolution. We do have that. But it means the will and the political will to create the environment to do that. So coming back to your question, whose budget it is, I think it's a budget for the immediate now, because we've got to stop the wrongs that are going on, but it's also a budget to plan for how we get to the next stage where we leapfrog in terms of development that we can do.
But for a long time we've been talking about fiscal consolidation. I don't know how many times we've used that phrase, and we keep talking and talking and talking about it. It's not happening.
Well, I think the reality here is the wheels of justice turns very slow. The hope that I was talking about earlier is we have Shamila Batoy been appointed, and it's what, 2 weeks now into her role, but hopefully we see much more action. And to Annabel's point earlier on, it's not just jail time. It's actually going after those that did wrong and getting the money back. That's the more important thing, and that's where hope will come back.
Okay, Geoff, whose budget?
I think this is a budget that is neutral. I think it's going to play...
Not for the voter.
It's going to play a bit to the voters, a bit to the rating agency, a bit to GDFI. I think it's the steady middle road budget. Don't upset anyone, but at the same time, try and show that you've got a clear vision.
Sure.
So I think it's I think, as I said right at the start, a balancing act. So I think this is at the end of the day, this is probably going to be a budget that doesn't please everyone. No one's going to be fully pleased with it, no constituency, but no one's going to be dissatisfied with it. So I think it's going to be pretty neutral.
Sure. Annabel, I'll twist your question slightly to ask if Tito has got room here to go radical. Donald Trump, as much as a lot of us don't like his politics, came in and he has shaken up the American economic system, a huge economy. Ours is much smaller. Are there things that the minister could do radically different here? And then you can answer the part about whose budget this is.
Well, if you want to be extremely radical, you could look at certain things like cutting costs. And indeed, I'm not saying you could, but I'm saying that is one of the definitions of being radical. Because if you have a look at what the Davis Tax Commission recommended in terms of South Africa's government finances, they said one of the key recommendation, their primary recommendation is to cut expenditure. Following that, if they don't do that, then they look at multiple tax increases, an array of tax increases. And I think, my answer to your earlier question was going to be this is probably going to be a budget for everyone because we are in a pre-election year. So there's probably going to be quite a lot of talk about expenditure and monies on social welfare services, drilling down into microeconomic areas of social welfare services, expenditures in hospitals, talking about areas and regions where they've actually made differences in people's lives. We must remember, we're close to a general election on the 8th of May. And I think at the same time, he's going to be looking at monies that were allocated to be spent last year that actually weren't spent. Those will return to fiscus. You could use some of that to help assist Eskom in its time of need, and also monies that you can save from elsewhere in the budget as well. Reprioritization of expenditures. Cyril Ramaphosa spoke very heavily about the need to reprioritize expenditure and get a lot more for the monies that we are obviously the monies that we collect from the taxpayer, and we need to obviously try and stimulate economic growth, but also provide a much healthier economic environment, one where we don't have these wastages, leakages, corruption, but also one as well where we actually stimulate economic growth, particularly business confidence, and we actually see a lift in fixed investment and job creation. So I think those are all going to be central themes, but I think he is going to need to be aware that obviously we need to try and have a impact on expenditure that does not see it go up materially and cause a credit rating downgrade, because getting a credit rating downgrade just before the general election and seeing very substantial rand weakness and then as a result a very big petrol price hike is really not going to appeal to the majority of voters in South Africa.
Got to look at those rating agencies as well as look at that electorate.
Low-hanging fruit is gone. I honestly think
there isn't.
I think it's been picked. So it really leaves it down to what can you do? And you asked, can he be radical? If he had room to be radical, austerity would be the word. So really going down to Eskom, World Bank did a survey and said Eskom has about 27,000 employees more than they should have. So 48,000 employees at Eskom, not necessary. And that's,
but he can't talk about that now, surely.
He can't talk about it. So that's why I said if he was going radical.
He's got to go and say, no one is going to be laid off. We're not talking about job losses, but
if he was going to be radical,
minds, we all know this is going to happen.
If he was going to be radical, that would be a start. And we've got hundreds of SOEs. So Eskom is not the only one. We actually haven't touched on SAA. We haven't touched on the post office. There's actually a long list of problems in the system. And Eskom is where our eyes have been fixed because we've had load shedding. So that's where one would look. Austerity would be, he would be able to go down the line and say, of the hundreds that we have, these are the things we could do. And those would move the dial.
And if you were to say who is focusing on in this budget, who would you say his focus is likely going to be?
I think the focus will likely be on the investor and ultimately trying to get that FDI, trying to get the offshore investors to buy into this, and ultimately the rating agencies. So it's trying to bring that confidence back into SA is open for business. SA makes sense for you to invest.
I want to widen the discussion a little bit, but go on before
I think that's a crucial turnaround strategy for South Africa.
Yeah.
You know, in the absence of this, we're going to continue on this very weak economic growth path, limping to, you know, lower and lower economic growth. And, you know, what comes after 0% growth? You know, you start to move into an unpleasant territory.
Have you guys done the maths around the $100 billion that he is looking for, and also the amounts that have been pledged, and what difference those numbers could make if they did indeed come into South Africa's economy?
Look, I think what we need to bear in mind about the 100 billion investment, at the investment summit itself in Joburg, you know, in Sandton last year, October, we actually saw a beauty parade of a lot of investors come up there who were going to invest anyway in South Africa.
Lots of pledges,
they, in any event, they were going to invest this amount of money in South Africa.
Are you saying there was no fresh money?
There was fresh money, but there was also a lot of money that was going to be invested already. So what we're trying to say is this $100 billion that you're mentioning is not all going to be new money. Some of it was going to be investment that was already going to happen in South Africa, and some of it will be new money.
My question is, and I want everybody to know this, my question is, if this money were new, if this money were fresh, what difference would it make? Do we need much more than we are targeting? Or are we getting comfortable with Anglo coming in and saying, our CapEx is going to be X amount when Anglo is going to invest that money anyway?
It depends on what sort of investment it is. You know, is it fixed investment where they're coming to build a lot of factories and hiring a lot of people with low skills, you know, semi-skilled? We're going to make a massive dent on the unemployment rate. Are we going to start uplifting people, drawing them out of poverty? And are we really going to start to see the flywheel turn and get demand going in the economy? Or is it going to be, you know, mergers and acquisitions? Is it going to be the type of investment that does not actually create labor-intensive jobs? You know, for us in South Africa, we need labor-intensive jobs, but we also need to see fast economic growth. I don't necessarily think we want to see very fast economic growth which was not job creating. You know, so there needs to be a bit of balance there. But clearly we do need fast economic growth to generate the revenues from a tax perspective to actually see ourselves become fiscally fit.
Look, you've got to take it into perspective. We've got a close to 27% unemployment rate.
27.1.
All right.
Narrower definition. I like the other one. 37, is it? Or thereabouts, 36.
Let's say it's close to 3 out of 10 people don't have a job. So investment has to stimulate jobs, but we're in a bit of the jaws of death if you talk about it right now, because if you're looking for investment that's going to come from foreign or even local, you're not going to go into an environment where the labor laws are so restrictive on you. We've had the minimum wage being approved and gazetted now, which is fantastic, but then we have people on the left saying it's actually going to do more harm than good. So what needs to happen is a real focus on developing jobs and giving people a sense, and look, we go back to the argument, it has to be a decent job. A decent job.
I don't know if we should be talking about decent job. I remember COSATU going on and on years ago about decent jobs, and I kept saying, come on guys, get the jobs first, and then you can talk about decent or not decent and that kind of thing.
You don't want people to be exploited, and I think our history has shown there's a lot of exploitment. So, I mean, a decent job means someone has the ability to at least buy the very basics of what they're doing, and not spend 30 to 40% of what they're earning in transport just to get to a job.
As we go towards the end, 6 minutes before you begin speaking, I wanted to ask all of you, to what extent is this Tito's budget? In other words, how much political capital or capital did this guy have in shaping this budget? Here we go.
Oh my
Boom.
I wish I was a political analyst. I'm not
you know the budget process.
I'm not too sure how much of the budget is his, but it was quite interesting to hear the tone that he used in October in the medium-term budget speech. And he was very heavy-handed in his approach in saying this is what needs to be done. So it'll be interesting to see if the tone is still as heavy and if it's maintained, because that was just a week after getting into office. So it'll be interesting to see, is that diluted? And that gives one a sense of how much power does he actually have within the ministry.
But that's Tito, right? That's vintage Tito. That's the way he speaks blunt.
So I'm expecting it to be wholly Tito's budget.
It is Tito's budget.
I think when he was finance minister, he just steered that ship and he was in charge, and that was the way it was. And I think, it's pretty much going to be the same for government finances. I think he probably will have had a lot of time to look at different areas that he needs to focus on. He might be a lot more nuanced, but I certainly think still it will have his hallmark on it.
Do you think there was a lot of argument, a lot of fighting as this budget and these numbers were being put together and agreed?
Possibly not these. Possibly not with
allow for that.
No. This is what National Treasury presents to Parliament.
Correct.
Then the debate happens.
Geoff?
No, I think it's Tito's budget. I think Tito knows what needs to be done. I think that much, finance and many cabinet ministers and most of the administration understands the hard choices we have to make as a country, and how we can accelerate growth and do all the things that we know we need to do. I think that the restraint that he'll have to balance is the political restraint. How much can he implement as to what he really wants to implement?
Right.
And I think, as I said, in an election year, and I made the comment earlier on, I think that restraint will be there. So, imagine, he's like a pit bull who's going to go after he knows what he's going after that bone, he knows what he needs to do. But from a political perspective, he's been held back by the administration, he's been restrained.
Sure.
So I think he'll do as much as he can, but there is this restraint.
He's not completely free. Mohammed?
I think Tito's a man of the soil. If you look at him, he's got experience. He's been through the heights of the financial sector. He's retired. He actually went back, and if you look at how he spent his time, he's very close to people and close to actually the rural areas as well. I'm holding a lot of hope for Tito. I think I think it's going to be a balance between a Tito and a Ramaphosa budget. But I hope that it's a more Tito budget. So
almost like a Tito and Ramaphosa budget.
Correct.
Dominated by which side of the ANC is that? Is that more the left? Is that more the right? Is that more the center?
I think the jury's out on that one.
Is there a danger that Tito could disappoint us?
I don't think so. I think
he disappointed us in November.
It depends what your definition of disappointment is. If he puts a budget that is good in terms of the long-term growth for what we need to do in this country, he can't disappoint. He may have short-term disappointed with the rating agencies, which we might not hit the notes that they're looking for, but at least we get the country back onto the growth path that we used to have.
But what are you saying? Are you saying he could disappoint us?
Well, I don't think he would.
Make a call. Will he disappoint us? Will he not?
I think if you're disappointed in that we're going to be taxed more, yes. But I think you can't be...
He's going to be doing the right thing.
I think it's going to be the right thing.
Geoff, will he disappoint? Do you not think so?
No, I think he's going to try and do a little bit for everyone.
He will not disappoint us.
No.
But also possibly disappoint everyone a little bit who were hoping he would do a lot more.
Exactly, because that's what I'm looking for.
Everybody's not happy.
If this guy came and surprised us all with...
They always say a good negotiation is one where both parties actually come out a bit unhappy. And perhaps that's what we might find here.
Okay, no surprises budget potentially here. We're looking at, ladies, gentlemen, thank you for your time and your participation in our debate. And to those of you at home, of course, stay tuned. We're going to take an ad break, and then when we come back, Tito will be speaking.